What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing truly unsettling real-life glitch in the matrix stories. We've discussed it here on this channel a few times, glitches in the matrix, and so many of you seem to be so very interested in these types of stories. I am someone who personally believes we more than likely are not living in base reality, and that most, if not all, of our lives are just simulation. Everything except the spirituality of our existence is simulation, and I often wonder if living in this life, being a human being here on Earth, is actually the afterlife. Like, maybe the punishment of when we die. This is the other side to our real life, which happens in spirit. I'm sure many of you have different opinions on what life really is and what these so-called glitches in the matrix could possibly be. And I'm also positive that many people who watch or otherwise just come across this video will think there's no such thing and that there's a perfectly rational and reasonable explanation for why these things happen. You won't convince me, but I am willing to at least listen to other people's opinions and points of view, so feel free to let me know how you feel and why in the comments below. Also, real quick, I would like to do something a little bit different with my listener encounter series here on this channel, and I want to start categorizing them instead of just doing a general video. I want to start doing that with personal glitch in the matrix stories sent in by you guys, my listeners. If you have any personal encounters at all, of course, send them in to me. But especially if you have personal glitch in the matrix stories, I would appreciate it, and my email will be available at the bottom of the screen towards the end of the video and in the description box as well. Glitch in the Matrix stories always fascinate me, and they're my most favorite thing to read about and listen to here on YouTube. Also, I do have a couple of my own that I'll either do a video about or I'll add it to the listener encounters video about glitches in the Matrix, provided you guys actually come through with some for me. For me, the whole concept of there even being a Matrix to glitch didn't enter my reality until Neo from the Matrix movies broke out of his own programming, so to speak, and I'm pretty sure that's where this whole phenomenon got its name. These types of stories will definitely make you wonder if perhaps whoever created that movie was onto something. Before we jump into all of this, though, I would really like to give a heartfelt thank you to my patrons and my members and everyone else who supports me here on this channel, financially and otherwise. It all helps so much. And even if you can't donate money at this time, or even if you don't want to, it's perfectly okay, because liking, sharing, commenting at least 7 characters, showing up to the live streams, all of that, etc., does help me get pushed out there into the larger YouTube community. And eventually, I hope, because of all your help, I can get to a place where I don't need to rely so heavily on financial donations anymore. Information on how to join my Patreon or become a member is in the description box of this video. With that being said, let's jump right in. I just want to say that all of the people who contributed to this video, I kept them as anonymous sources. So our first encounter also comes from an anonymous source who said that one day he was just sitting in his living room watching TV like any other normal day. Suddenly, he had the overwhelming urge to go outside and stand on his front lawn. He described the feeling as almost like compulsion, where it was so incredibly overwhelming that he almost felt as though if he didn't obey it, something really terrible was going to happen. The man jumped up, feeling a bit wobbly and like he had taken suddenly some sort of strong narcotic or drank a few too many alcoholic beverages. He didn't feel right. He walked out onto his front lawn and stood there, facing away from his house and really trying to understand what was going on and get his bearings. He was suddenly very confused in his mind, but knew where he was and kind of why he was doing what he was doing. He remembered feeling forced to go outside and to stand there. After what he thought was maybe like 10 minutes, he went back inside and he did feel perfectly fine again suddenly, almost feeling foolish for having done what he had just done. Like, why did I go and stand on the lawn like that for 10 minutes? However, when he got inside of his front door and started to look around, he immediately saw that something strange did indeed just happen. The walls in his home were a completely different color than they had always been, and what was on those walls even further confused and confounded him. The man said that he saw his wedding photos hanging there on the newly covered walls, but in almost the same exact spots where they'd always been. But the woman in the photos was not his wife. She wore the same dress and had her hair done the same way, but the woman wasn't the woman he married. There were some differences. He felt really dizzy. He walked through the house and noticed a lot of minor changes that someone who didn't live there more than likely wouldn't ever notice, like a wine stain on the rug in the master bedroom he and his wife had had a very big argument over and that he could never get completely cleaned up. It was gone, no more stain. He called his wife because he felt like hearing her voice would maybe shock him back into reality, because by this point, he really thought he was having some sort of stroke or a nervous breakdown or something was going on. The voice that answered didn't sound exactly the same as the one he grew to know and depend on for the last however many years, but it did sound close enough that he was able to convince himself that everything was okay, and once she got home from work, that everything would make sense again. I was just trying to understand this as I went through this, because I don't want to criticize this guy's behavior, because who knows what someone would do in a situation like this. I don't know what I would do. I mean, even myself, with knowing that glitches do happen and that we are more than likely living in a simulation, I would probably freak out too if something like this happened to me. He passed out on the couch, probably because his adrenaline had so quickly and suddenly spiked for a while, and he woke up when his wife came through the door from work. It was the same woman from the photos, whom he said looked as though she could have been a fraternal twin of his wife or something, but that was not his wife. There were these teeny small differences, like a little birthmark on the woman's face, and he kind of explained that she looked enough like his wife, but he just somehow knew deep down inside that it was not her. His wife didn't have a twin, and she didn't act strangely at all when she saw him. When she saw the new colors of the walls and all of the other changes that had spontaneously sprung up around the home, she didn't react to them. He tried to play it cool and act as though everything was fine, but that he just had a headache, and this new wife of his seemed to buy it. She told him to go lay down while she unpacked from work and made them dinner. This guy didn't know what to do, and he kind of just went along with it, starting to wonder if perhaps he did have some sort of mini stroke or nervous breakdown or something like that. Maybe he was losing his mind for all he knew. Maybe everything was always as it had seemingly been so suddenly when he came back in from standing on the lawn. So maybe the changes didn't exist. Maybe that was how it had always been. He knew that he needed to do something, so he made an appointment with his doctor, and the next day he went to work. His job was basically the same, again with a different color scheme though, and there were even some co-workers from other departments with whom he had become friendly who seemingly didn't exist anymore and never had, and if they existed, they didn't work there in those other departments at his job. He somehow got through all of this with minimal questions being asked of him about his oftentimes shocked, strange, and somewhat twitchy new way of behaving. I mean, the guy was nervous and shocked over and over again by the new color scheme, all of these different little subtle changes around his workplace. He did go and get a full medical checkup, a complete and total physical, and there was nothing at all wrong with him. He was just as healthy as he had always been. This man said that he's since just accepted that for whatever reason, he's now living his best life in an alternate dimension. Like, what else can he do? You don't know how to get back when something like this happens to you. He often wonders about the version of himself that lived here in this reality originally, and if his original wife ever even noticed that he was different. Or was he different? There's no way of knowing, but I found this story to be very credible compared to most of the ones I came across or am sent, because at the end of the day, he realized there was nothing he could do and just made the best of the situation. He's now thriving, though he does sometimes miss who he calls his real family. Everyone in his life was similar but a bit different, but no one ever noticed that he was as well. Guys, this one is so crazy because I talk a lot here on this channel about switching timelines and things like timeline jumping, and I've never heard of anyone doing it to where they end up in a completely different reality. I mean, sure, you're now on a different path, hopefully a better one, once you switch and shift timelines, but everyone else, the Earth as an energy and the entire collective, normally will shift with you for better or worse. And oftentimes, with 2012 being the only exception I know of, though I'm sure there are many more, the timeline you're originally from is still there, somewhere, for you to return it to someday, should fate warrant it. I want so badly to keep this video light and breezy, but I had to mention here that there is a big difference between what happened to this guy and what I'm talking about when I discuss timeline jumping with you all here on this channel. I was thinking about covering the concept of timeline jumping and what it means for individuals who do it, as well as for when we have a collective timeline shift, but I'll have to separate that video, so let me know in the comments what you think about me possibly doing something like that, and let's move on. So this next glitch is one I keep seeing happening more and more in recent years. It isn't happening often, mind you, but it's happening enough that if you're paying attention to things like this, then you would surely notice it. The way it happens is different in every case, but the result is always the same, and I chose the most descriptive example that I could find to use here in this video. The person in question was walking to work one morning, as they did every single morning, and at the same time of day as they did 5 or 6 days a week for the last decade or so. They always walked the same way at the same time and never deviated from that path, but on this particular day, they had a very strange and sudden urge to take a different route to work. For a couple of minutes, they continued on in their usual direction, but the feeling became so overwhelming for them to turn down an upcoming alley on the opposite side of the street that they couldn't ignore it. It wasn't quite compulsion, but it was almost that strong. So once again, we have the person saying they feel like they absolutely couldn't not do it. They were compelled. Our witness quickly walked across the street and into the alley, which, by the way, he said he had never noticed before and wasn't even aware of. This was odd in and of itself because he grew up in that same area and had explored all over the place as a kid, but never saw this alley there before. He never knew it was there. Also, even though they usually walked on the opposite side of the street, he hadn't ever noticed that it was there before. It was weird. The whole situation was weird. Our witness said he walked about 15 feet into the alley and then suddenly everything became confusing and somewhat blurry, and he felt as though he were walking through a thick fog before then feeling like he exited his body and was existing only in spirit. He went on to explain that he didn't know, obviously, what being fully in spirit would feel like otherwise, but that he just knew in his mind that that's what was happening. He said everything in his mind scrambled up and he was only somewhat conscious, floating through some other very strange alternate reality or dimension. There were all different shapes and colors zooming past him and kind of floating all around him as he floated there, almost unmoving, or at the very least moving in extremely slow motion. He said that suddenly a vision broke through all of the blurred colors and shapes and he was able to clearly see what he called, quote, what resembled a bunch of strange looking people that in my mind resembled businessmen in suits, end quote. These strange figures became aware that he could see them, and they looked absolutely shocked and even startled over it, and suddenly one of these beings / people made a quick movement with their arms, and suddenly everything for our witness went black. When he came to, he was on a completely different street all the way across the city and had no knowledge of how he had gotten there or what had transpired in between the time from when he was in that alley and seemingly floating until he was back in our reality again and wondering what in the world had just happened and what was going on. He was back on the usual street he would have taken had he not gone down the alley, but all the way uptown, closer to his job. He felt dizzy and sick to his stomach, and also he said he felt depressed and very disturbed, like down to his soul, about what he had just experienced. He says he had never had hallucinations before and had no mental health diagnosis. And I always choose to take people at their word, and usually will only cover encounters or stories that I really instinctively believe in and believe really happened. So I'm choosing to take the man's word on that one. He went on to say that he believes that he had somehow and for whatever reason been transported into the actual matrix itself, and that he watched as the glitch corrected itself. I personally think that he was transported, yes, into the actual matrix, but possibly base reality, right? Where the beings who created and set up the simulation are, where they live and work on the simulation, I suppose. So this guy went on to say that he believes that he had somehow and for whatever reason been transported into the actual matrix, as I said, but he said he watched as the glitch corrected itself. As he did so, he said he could clearly see all of those people watching him as though he were some kind of caged animal. And that's what he said. They were looking at me as though I were some kind of caged animal, and they were almost terrified of him. While there in that moment, he knew that he was being completely controlled somehow in his normal, average, everyday life. He's still bothered very much by the experience, but was never really able to know for sure what had happened to him or why. He does believe, though, that he did in fact experience the glitch itself and went to what we in this community call base reality. So it's like he pops in and they're like, oh my gosh, one of the Sims are here, right? It's like playing Sims, and one of the Sims pops out of the computer or of the game and is just like standing there in front of you. That is crazy if you put it in that context. Wow. These are all so crazy, but these types of encounters always make me kind of jealous, if I'm being honest. These people, and as I said earlier, it happens more often than you think, they get to experience, even if only for a moment or two, and even if only while in a somewhat feverish state, base reality, the actual place where they control the simulation I believe we all live in. It's hard not to talk in circles about all of this, particularly when it comes to my spiritual beliefs, which are also based on what I know to be fact because of my own life experiences. And there's so much nuance to these situations and to the conversations surrounding them that I'm just going to let this information sit with you all, and you can let me know what you think in the comments below about all of these stories. But this one in particular, I really would love to hear what you guys have to say. So this next one isn't as obvious, but it was still a bit creepy in my opinion. A man said that he and his wife were going out to eat at a restaurant one night, and the area where they were going was one of those that are a little bit more upscale, or seemingly so, than your usual shopping malls. The restaurant was one of many buildings in a strip mall in the nicer part of town, and because it was a Saturday night, the whole place was bound to be super busy. He made a reservation a week in advance and knew that they would have to arrive at least a half hour early in order to make sure they found a parking spot, and even then they would be lucky to get one anywhere near the actual building, and they knew they would never get a spot in the actual lot. They lived there a long time and had eaten at this particular restaurant and some of the others in the strip mall and nearby many times before. The mall was located about 10 minutes off of the highway, and he described it as you kind of just come into this busy area after exiting the highway and then going through some desolate roads, and really a whole lot of nothing up to when you're just suddenly in this city part of the area. Then suddenly you hit the center of the city and everything is always very, very busy no matter what night of the week it is, but on the weekends especially. So when he and his wife pulled up to the restaurant, to the mall itself that night, and saw absolutely no one on the streets, no vehicles parked anywhere, and all of the lights off in and around the mall, they were extremely confused, to say the least. They were immediately creeped out and decided to drive around the block to see if anything was going on that would maybe explain why everything was seemingly shut down. He said even the buildings and homes surrounding the area weren't lit at all, and no one else was anywhere as far as their eyes could see. As they turned the corner, they saw that several streetlights, which were usually very bright and provided a lot of light to help set the ambiance of the busy and bustling city nightlife, were flickering on and off, and most of the others were completely dark. As they made their next left and rounded the next corner, there was a fire truck parked on the side of the road with the door open. It was running, but again, there was no one in, near, or around the vehicle itself. They were ready to call it a night and go home, having no interest in knowing or understanding what the hell was happening. Everything was eerily silent, and the whole situation was really starting to get to them. They were becoming terrified. They went from somewhat nervous to absolutely petrified in a matter of minutes. They turned their next corner to go and make their way back to the highway because they wanted to go home, when there was what sounded almost like an explosion of sound and lights coming from where the strip mall was located. It was like eerily silent, turn the corner, bam, bustling city nightlife. They looked over and saw that the same parking lot was full. There were people everywhere talking and laughing. All the buildings in the mall were open and lit up, and there was no parking anywhere as far as they could tell. They couldn't believe it and decided to go around the block again. When they did, all of the lights in the nearby homes and businesses were on. The people were inside of the buildings and walking out on the streets, etc. There was no fire truck on the corner, and the streets lights were all working normally. The man and his wife went back home anyway, both of them scared about what they had just been through, but being perfectly okay with not understanding at all what happened. Once some time had passed and they started learning about so-called glitches in the matrix, they understood that something beyond their comprehension had happened and have tried to avoid the subject as best they could from there on out. I know that some people are going to say that maybe they weren't aware of the time or that they had somehow gotten it wrong. Any excuse to try and reasonably and rationally explain this unexplainable thing that just happened, but they knew what time it was, and there's no way that more than 1,000 people and 30 businesses could suddenly spring up with all of them suddenly arriving in the area, parking, ordering and receiving food, not to mention having shopping bags full of items just bought, etc., all in the time it took for them to go around the block, which, by the way, our witness estimated had taken less than 10 minutes. I don't have an explanation for this one, guys, except to say that maybe they entered a time period where the place was closed down for some sort of emergency or that it had been evacuated for whatever reason. Our witness admitted he didn't pay too much attention to whether or not the stores and restaurants they saw that night when everything was seemingly closed down were the same as the ones that are normally there, but I wonder if perhaps they weren't looking into an alternate dimension or reality or even the past, but if maybe they somehow got a glimpse of something to come in the future. I guess we'll never know, so let's move on. This one was a little bit different, but I still thought I should mention it. Our witness said she remembers when she was around 10 years old, just sitting alone in her bedroom playing with some dolls. She didn't have siblings and her mom worked a lot, so after school it was usually up to her to keep herself entertained until her mother got home. She had imaginary friends and would talk to them all the time, and she would even involve them in her play, like that day when she was playing with her dolls. She said she remembered this day in particular, even though it was like so many others and should have never stood out to her, but she remembered it so clearly because she felt that day this overwhelming sensation and feeling like she knew she was being watched. She said it wasn't a scary feeling, as you might think it should have been, but just that she had the feeling someone or something was there in her room with her. She didn't grow up knowing about the paranormal or anything like that, and so she decided to invite whoever was there to play dolls with her. She felt a breeze blow past her and could have sworn someone sat down right next to her on her bedroom floor and started playing with her, even though her dolls didn't move and she couldn't hear anyone else there with her. Eventually, the memory faded, but it never left her completely. When she was older in college, she and her roommates decided to do an online meditation that was supposed to bring you back to a specific moment in your childhood, like an traveling astral projection type thing, and you get to choose where you went. By the way, don't mess with this kind of stuff, guys, if you don't know what you're doing. It could be really dangerous, and I almost learned that the hard way. I've talked about it before with the military-based astral projection stuff, so please don't. They all laid there in their sleeping bags on the floor and did their best to follow along with the meditation. She decided to go back to that day when she clearly felt someone in the room with her who had been watching her and who sat down to play with her. She wanted to see if it was someone in spirit, because she would be there astrally in spirit technically and probably would be able to see who it was. It turns out no one was there that day. Not really, as she saw, as she watched on in shock from her astral body, that it was her, as a college student visiting astrally from her dorm, who had been there the whole time looking in on her and even trying to play dolls without being able to say anything to her child self so that she could hear it, and being unable to move the dolls in any way. This one completely and totally blew my mind. You'd be surprised, if you're someone who can astral travel or who uses those types of meditations, how many times it's actually you having astral projected that's actually the presence you felt or knew was there at some other previous point in your life. It is wild. Last but definitely not least, I wanted to cover a glitch story that was more paranormal in nature, and did find several of these, as well as I have a few more that were sent to me already for listener encounters. So if you all want more glitches in the Matrix or a full listener encounters video focusing on this phenomenon, let me know and send in your encounters. So our last encounter comes from a young woman who was home from college for the summer, visiting with her father in anticipation for her paternal grandmother's birthday. She had been there about a week, and her father worked all week long during the day, usually coming home around 6 in the evening. She knew that every once in a while he would come home for lunch around noon if he chose to, but it wasn't often, and normally he would call and let her know that that's what he was doing, so she wouldn't be caught off guard or startled by hearing someone in the house suddenly. She spent her days just lying around in bed on social media, streaming her favorite movies and television shows. About a week after she had gotten there, she was already used to the sounds of the house. It was a house she grew up in and had become accustomed once again to her father's schedule. Suddenly, though, on this day, she heard someone in the kitchen downstairs and checked her phone to see if maybe she had missed a call from her father. She hadn't. He hadn't called her. She looked out the window into the driveway and saw an old Mustang parked where her father's Volvo normally would have been had he been home. She goes on to explain that her father had grown up in that house, and she had as well, with her mother having moved out about a decade earlier when her parents divorced. She lived with her dad, but she still visited with her mom as well. The young woman said she suddenly realized, in all of her fear and confusion, that it was the day before her grandmother's birthday, and wondered if maybe her father had invited another family member, or others, plural, to come and stay, and just had forgotten to tell her about it. Feeling a little bit better, but not completely, calmed down and okay, she went downstairs to the kitchen to see who was there. On her way down, and while thinking all of the aforementioned things as she went, she had heard dishes clanging and banging around and knew for sure that someone was there in that kitchen. She knew most, if not all, of her dad's large family and didn't know any of them who drove an old Mustang convertible, but she was holding on to hope that she wasn't being burgled and wouldn't be hurt, attacked, or harmed in any way. And she figured that maybe her father had just forgotten to tell her they'd be having company that day or whatever. She walked into the kitchen and saw a man wearing a bright red hockey jersey, a bright red hat, and some blue jeans, and she did not recognize him from behind. She recognized the hat and the jersey because she knew her father was a lifelong and diehard fan of that particular team, and she had been conditioned to love that team as well, so she immediately recognized the symbols on this jersey and hat. She was terrified and her legs shook as she cleared her throat and asked who the person was and what the hell they were doing in her kitchen. This person froze, seemingly just as scared, and turned to face her. Our witness said it was her father after all, but not, explaining that it was her father when he was in his early 20s and a couple of years before she was born. She didn't know what to say, and this man before her was clearly just as terrified as she was, as he dropped the sandwich he had seemingly just made and slowly started to back out of the room. She ran after him, but he was gone without having actually gone anywhere. She looked all over the house and looked in the driveway where she didn't see any vehicles anymore, and the old Mustang was now gone. It's like the image of her father had disappeared into the other room and then into the ether altogether. This girl was scared because she didn't understand what had just happened to her, and she ran back to her bedroom and stayed locked in her room all day until her dad came home from work. She tried to casually ask him over dinner if he had ever owned a Mustang convertible, and he laughed and asked her, "How did you know that?" as they both knew it wasn't something they'd ever discussed before. He told her he sold it when her mom had become pregnant with her because as a young family just starting out, they needed the money. She asked if he had any photos, and he said he only had one. He went and looked for it and came back a few minutes later, and the photo he showed made her go pale. It was one of her father when he was in his early 20s, standing in the driveway of that same house in front of the exact same Mustang and wearing the exact same outfit he had been wearing when she somehow had crossed paths with the younger version of him in the kitchen that same afternoon. She tried to hide her surprise, but eventually ended up telling him what had happened to her. And her father responded by losing all of the color in his face and getting up to start pacing around the room. He said he had thought the house was haunted when he was younger because one time he came home from work to have lunch and saw the blurry apparition of a young blonde woman standing in the kitchen, clearing their throat or making some kind of strange noise and trying to speak to him. He said he dropped his sandwich and ran out of there as fast as he could. He remembered it very clearly, but couldn't remember what the young woman looked like because he couldn't see her very clearly. He said it happened the same day her mother told him she was pregnant with her. No one knows what it all means, including me. Sometimes these things just happen, and there's no real rhyme or reason as to why or how they do. In fact, I believe that a lot of the time when someone thinks their house is haunted, it turns out that it's just there's a very thin connection between this reality and another one, besides the very thin veil that separates us humans from the world of spirit and the other side, whatever the concept is to you. This encounter didn't have them switching dimensions. It had two people who jumped a timeline at different points in their lives just to end up in the exact same place and talking about it 20 years or so later. It's remarkable and it absolutely fascinates me, even if, I say again, I could go around and around in circles trying to make it make sense. It just doesn't most of the time, and I don't think it's really meant to. It's truly these times when I can say, it is what it is, right? I don't usually use that term, but when listening to these types of stories, I just can say it is what it is and really mean it, because there's nothing more any of us, myself included, can really do with or about it. If you like these stories and if you're fascinated by and interested in glitches in the Matrix as I am, please let me know and I'll bring you so much more on this subject. And in fact, I can't wait to do just that and probably will regardless, but it would be nice if you guys are on board with me and want to come along for the ride. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content. If you enjoyed hanging out with me, spread the love by sharing this video. Subscribe if you haven't already, and make sure your notification bell is turned on and switched to all so you can get updated and informed whenever I post new content. Please support the YouTube Shorts, support all the videos, watch the live streams even if you can't catch them live. Guys, every single view counts, and the shorts are a good way to support me very quickly because they go anywhere from 4 to 59 seconds and usually no more than that. And also there's a lot of glimpses into my everyday life and things like that through the YouTube Shorts. In the description box, you will find very important links, ways to donate to the channel, my PayPal, my Cash App, my Amazon wish list gift link in case you guys want to send me a gift. Maybe you can't donate, maybe you don't want to donate, but you would like to send me something. That is what that Amazon wish list gift link is for. Otherwise, again, PayPal, Cash App. Links for all of my books, Kindle, paperback, and Audible versions should be in the description box, but if you can't find one that you're looking for, or really if you just want to make it easier on yourself, go to Amazon, type in Gemma Jade Books, and my entire collection of 10 or 11 books will pop up, including my newest one, Gone Mysterious Disappearances, Volume 4. If you want an autographed copy of any of my books, please email me before you make the purchase. Also, email me for any and other correspondence, for all correspondence, and to send in your personal encounters, whether they're glitch in the matrix or otherwise. My email is GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. Search me up on TikTok, it's GemmaJadeYT. Facebook, just Gemma Jade. You will see my picture there. Other than that, guys, I mean, be kind to each other. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. Only accept the energy that you put out to the best of your ability, right? I believe in you. I got your back. You can do anything you put your mind to. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.